I think I'm going to be here for a while. I got to look at my schedule. Do you know we're still in March? Still blessed to be in Mark. Isn't it interesting? A lot of the readings are very similar to the readings that we have. Let's talk about something a little bit different today. Remember what I told you about, or what we talked about? You know, the Greek is a logos to telos. This assumes, even though the telos is unstated, where does the conclusion come? Where does a conclusion in Greek come? At the beginning or end? At the end, right? It's an assumed thing. It's not written down. Now, in Hebrew, it's synopsis body. Okay? Where does the conclusion come? At the beginning. Yeah, the conclusion is stated such as it is, right? So, did you ever think about this? Think about this. This is really important because this is their worldview. This is a worldview of the Hebrew concepts. So, if the conclusion is at the beginning, so for example, therefore, like for example, Shabbat. On Shabbat you can't walk very far, right? You have a limit that you can walk. But therefore, the limit that I may walk, right? The limit of my walking is dot, dot, dot. Now in a Greek logical argument, and I've taught this before, and I'll go back a little bit. In a logical argument, you start with what? The definitions, right? You get to make your definitions, then you have your assumptions, and then you have your argument, and then you have your conclusions. That's the way a logical argument works. But if I start with my conclusions, what have I not done? I don't have any definitions, assumptions. I don't have any arguments. Now, put your thinking caps on. Why did the Jewish people come to the conclusion that they could walk anywhere in the city of Jerusalem as long as there was a rope around it? Because they started with the conclusion that the limit of the amount I could walk is what? As long as, well, an area bounded by a rope is a limited area, so therefore that limit. But now I begin to make my definitions after I've done my conclusion, which means that now my definitions could be almost anything, right? It's not bounded by reason or logic or rationality. And so we say we are Greek thinkers. So we're post-apocalyptic Greek thinkers because I don't think anybody's thinking Greek thinking in America's universities. Did you see there was a judge that actually allowed 2 women to be put on a birth certificate? Yeah. Now, I want to see the proof that one of those women conceived the baby on the other, because that is physically impossible. I don't care who you are, it is impossible for 2 women to give birth to a child right now in the world. But a judge using logic and reasoning and the judicial system came to the conclusion that that was a reasoned response, which is basically what? What's he basing on? That's medieval witchcraftism, right? That's irrationality. You know, it's nonsense. We say it's nonsense. That is basically writing the conclusion first, right? Now, the Hebrews, the rabbis came together with the Talmudic writings. All the Talmudic understanding is based in this type of reasoning. And that's why Jesus, a Greek thinker, was pounding them all the time, right? So I just was thinking about this, and I thought, you know, I hadn't talked about this before. I think it's really important to note this. But when you're going backwards into medievalism, right, into witchcraft, medievalism, and whatever is your magic and nonsense you want, you know, this is actually a step beyond that. It is a reasoned step. It gives you irrational answers sometimes, or answers that, okay, do you think it would please God or displease God, the fact that you kind of try to weasel out of his commandments? I'm just saying. I'm just saying. A Greek worldview would say, you know, God has commandments. It's a good idea to follow them, right? The Hebrew worldview, based in a synopsis body response, says, well, maybe we can be lawyers about this. But you know what? Lawyering up in heaven ain't a great idea. I'm just saying. I'm pointing that out. Anyway, just think about this. You know, when you think about rationality of thought, and especially about how the things are different, especially the differences in the way that the thinking that is going on in the minds of, for example, the Grammateus, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the rabbis, and the thinking and the way that Jesus is presenting it. So with that, today, chapter 12.35, AGIO. Okay, that doesn't look anything like hagios, right? Hagios, but it's a silent H, agio, hagios. So what is hagios? I gave you the thing right there. I've been through this before. I know we've been through it before. It's always good to remind ourselves. Hagios means, it's from hagos. Hagio. Oh, almost the same, right? Oh, my goodness. Should be omega. Anyway, agio, hagos, means an awful thing. An awful, did I spell it right? Awful thing. And we get the word
hag.
Hag from it. Yes. Hag comes from this word. The most famous of the famous is what? What did, was it Euripides? What did Euripides? Euripides, guy, his eyes ripped out. Who did he meet that was the awful thing? The Sphinx. One of the Sphinx. He met, I think it was a Sphinx. I can't remember. Anyway, it was a famous hagios, a famous awful thing, a demigod, right, that asked him riddles. And he was able to answer the riddles and croak the creature. The point is this, hagios, the word we're going to look at today, hagios pneuma. Hagios pneuma is mentioned 3 times in Mark. We're going to look at the second mention. But hagios pneuma, here's pneuma. P-N-E-U-M-A-T-I. Pneumati. Pneuma. Remember I told you I always give it to you so if you're following along in your Greek linear text, you can find it. But pneuma means a conscious breath. What is the unconscious breath called? Sarx, suke, pneuma. What is the unconscious breath?
Suke.
The unconscious breath is suke. The Greeks thought you were always thinking. So the unconscious breath is suke. The conscious breath is pneuma. You consciously take a breath. The conscious breath is a spirit breath. In other words, this is, in Greek thought, the pneuma is what gives you the ability to make a decision. It is the quality of the human being that allows you to be a human being that gives you suke. Because you're always thinking, right? But this is what gives form to that thinking, the pneuma. The pneuma, spirit, the suke, thought, the sarx, the flesh. This is Greek. And I know it gets complicated. I mean, we simplify, right? Because we're English speakers, we like to simplify stuff. The Greeks like this stuff to be all paradoxical, right? They love paradox. Paradox is their way. So they like it to be kind of messed up. Hagios pneuma, the awful thing, the awful breath. The awful breath, and you want to say the awful breath of God? This is a direct, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a direct translation of Ruach HaKodesh. Ruach HaKodesh is the Ruach HaKodesh. I can't remember. It's the breath. It's the you could say holy, but it's the awful breath from the holy place. The awful breath from the holy place. The holy place. So the Ruach HaKodesh is the Hebrew word for the Holy Spirit. And in Greek, it is translated the awful breath. You can see the awful breath of God. God has bad breath, right? Hagios pneuma. The other word that's really interesting, A-S-P-A-S-M-O-U-S, aspasmos. Let's see. Aspasmos. Aspasmos, literally this, okay, it's translated, you notice it's translated as a greeting or salutation. It literally comes from the word to mean aspasomai, which means to enfold in your arms. It means to do what when you greet someone?
Hug them.
You hug them. It means to hug as a greeting. It is not as simple as they like to put it in our Greek, in the Strongs and Vines. Strongs and Vines would lead you to believe that this is just any greeting. No, it's not any greeting. It is specifically a hug, an embrace. You embrace a person. So with that, let's look at.
Why don't, before you take off on that,
Yeah.
what do we believe historically? Who trained Jesus? Did he acquire Greek thinking directly from God? Because his teachers obviously were not Greek thinkers. So why the dilemma? Why the difference?
I would say that what you said is right, that, okay, Jesus is God. I think God's a Greek thinker, and when God comes down, he's like, okay, this, you say, why Greek? Why is it all Greek? Why is the world Greek, right? I think God wanted it to be absolute concrete, and so that is a theological argument, right? Now, who taught him? That's a beautiful question. I basically would love to teach the Arch Code documents. In the Arch Code documents, there is a letter from the supposed rabbi that taught Christ to the Sanhedrin. And it's in the Arch Code documents. I got a copy of the Arch Code documents. You can read the letter. It may or may not be true. It sounds true because it disparages Jesus to a degree. It says this is a great, young man who should be for the Sanhedrin, that would be a great, but yet it disparages some of his thinking. Whoa. And also disparages his parents as being poor and backwards, right?
But don't you have to be taught how to think? I mean, isn't it a discipline?
Yeah, kind of ish. I would say so. Matter of fact, it comes out of your culture. But yeah, Max.
I thought God was omniscient, so why would he have to be taught by anybody?
Well,
that's my question, Max, is did he learn how to think, or was he I know we don't know the answer. I was just before
this is a beautiful theological question. This is one of the things you've asked God.
Philippians 2 says he laid aside his rights as God and humbled himself and became a creature, a man. So he was God, but he wasn't. He laid his rights and privileges aside.
Now remember, our thinking is based in 2,000 years of Christian thinking about God, about Jesus and God. And guess where this idea comes from? Anselm. I had to write a paper on it when I was in college. Anselm was the guy who wrote the idea. He's the original guy that said that God, or Jesus, is both God and man. Both 100% God and 100% man. This guy's writing, logical argument, became the treatise for the Catholic Church and for all churches from then on. We look back at Scripture. We look back, I don't like to say Scripture. We look back at the Old Testament, New Testament documents, And we find support for the logical reasoning that we have developed over 2,000 years. But literally the early church did not believe this. Well, I'll take that back. The early church was not specifically focused on their theological ideas. Remember, I talked last time about the Arianism, Arianism versus Nicene. The Arians believed that God existed and he created Jesus, and Jesus created the Holy Spirit. An Arian view is considered, by us, we consider that to be heresy. Yeah, it's a heresy. It's a heresy. People die, And by the way, the Orthodox Church said it's okay. Whoever, it doesn't matter whether you believe Nicene or Arian, we'll accept you, right? But the Catholic Church said, oh no, Nicene's the way, we'll kill you if you're not thinking this way. That's not to put a disparagement on the Catholic Church. I mean, it seems to set, right? And we all are Nicene. We do Apostolic, Nicene, and Anastasian. But remember, at the beginning, the theological ideas were not bound. They weren't determined. They weren't logically argued. It's taken 2,000 years to get, and now we're in a backward spiral, right? There's no logical reasoning coming out of anywhere. I don't think anywhere at all. But, this guy did a treatise, and you can go read it. It's a very famous treatise on Jesus as both 100% God and 100% man. And that was the development of that theological idea. So that we hold to that because of his reasoning. Now, when we look back at the New Testament documents, we find what? It's supported, right? It's supported by the paradox, by the statements, by the reasoning in the New Testament. But it took a while for it to be prized out. This was around, I think it's the 1400s. 1400s when he was writing, I believe.
Can you spell that for me? I can't read it from
Anselm, I think it's A-N-S-E-L-M. Yeah. Anselm. I think that's the guy. Like I said, I had to write a paper on this guy. But look it up. Just look up the proof of 100% God and 100% man, and you'll find it in the internet, and you'll find the text. But anyway, part of a Christian education at one time was to study Augustine, Anselm, all the famous Christian writers, Teresa, St. Teresa of Avila, Lawrence, Brother Lawrence, Practice of the Presence of God, Benedictine, part of a Christian education used to be to study all these works. Ask your kid what they're studying in college for Christian education. I hope they are still studying those works. I mean, we read all of it, bits and pieces, you know what I'm saying? When I was going through my Christian education at a Lutheran college in my religious studies. And it was part of the required curriculum for the time. So, this stuff is kind of like what I would call the basis of theology, right? And by the way, that's one of the reasons in my classes, I don't teach theology or doctrine. You know why, right? I don't think most people are prepared to address theology or doctrine because unless you have studied a lot of this Christian information, it is very difficult to discuss theology and doctrine from a Christian perspective. You know what I mean? If you were to go back and rewrite the books every time you studied, where would you be, right? But if you have a background of Christian theology and thinking and reason, then guess what you can do? We can begin to discuss theology and doctrine. We can begin to really work in that sphere. But like I said, most people, unfortunately, have not been trained that way. And so where do you go with that, right? Because we can make up all kinds of stuff in our minds, but it doesn't make it true, it doesn't make it right. So that's why it's really cool, in my opinion, to look at, for example, Mark in the original language, and then what do? It's just history. It's just what did the words say, right? That makes it easy, in my opinion. So I don't know if that fully answers the question, but
Didn't answer the question.
Didn't answer the question at all, okay? But the point is, I think, you know, like I said, the Archcode documents show that there was a rabbi that trained Jesus. I think Jesus...
And what type of thinking?
Well, he was treating him a rabbi, but Jesus was obviously immersed in Greek, in the Greek world. And so, where he was in the Galil, he may have had a rabbi that was his main trainer, right? But he was immersed in the Hellenistic world. So I think that Jesus, I think theologically Jesus is God, 100% God, 100% man. Okay, that's a theological idea, all right? But I think that's what I am convinced of. However, if you are convinced that Jesus was just a man, the answer to the question is he was immersed in Hellenistic culture and was a genius for his age because he took that Hellenistic culture and did what with it in the Hebrew culture? He immersed the Hebrew culture into the Hellenistic culture so they were seamless. You see, he was a genius. That's what he did. He took the Hellenistic, because what was it always between the Hellenistic culture and the Greek culture, or the Hellenistic culture and the Hebrew culture? What were they at? They're clashing. They're at odds because of their viewpoint. Logos to telos is very different than synopsis body, right? The logical reasoning, the reasoning used by the rabbis was significantly different than the Greeks. But what did Jesus do? Jesus took the reasoning of the Greeks and applied it to the Hebrews. And they didn't like it very much. Sometimes we don't like it very much, right? But that's what he did. So, that may partially answer the question. I don't know. This is a very difficult thing.
I know you don't know the answer, but
I
I'm
don't.
seeking your opinion. That was he trained?
I think that because he was immersed in Greek, and we don't have a letter from his Greek teacher, but you know what? It is quite obvious to me that Jesus did what with Greek? He could read it. And not only did he read it, he knew the Septuagint extremely well. So, whether it was because he was God that he knew the Septuagint, and he knew all the Tanakh, and he knew the Talmud. Remember I told you, it wouldn't have impressed the guys in the temple that he just knew the Torah. It would impress him that he knew the Tanakh, right, everything. And it would really impress the Pharisees that he knew the Talmud. But what would impress all the other people? That he knew the Septuagint. You see? So I think whether it was miraculous or because Jesus was just a scholar of his age. Right? You see, you can argue either way. I'm just saying.
I mean, he was a poor kid. How did he get access to these things? Those are the things that are going around.
The book thief. Now, well, remember, you know, that's a great question because, you know, if he had a rabbi, obviously he had a rabbi, and the rabbi wrote that this guy was advanced. So that means that the rabbi was showing him what? The Tanakh, right? And maybe the Talmud. Well, the Talmud didn't exist, but he may have been talking him through the memorization of the Talmud. So this rabbi may have done that. But the rabbi, what is classical about the rabbis, especially the rabbis of the Galil, the rabbis of that area, as opposed to Jerusalem or Babylon? Well, maybe if he was in Alexandria. If he was in Alexandria, what did he have access to?
Library.
Well, which may have had 7 books. No, it probably had 100 books, but, you know. But yeah, he may have had a rabbi, or he may have had the experience of someone who had access to those works, whether it was from, you know, Egypt or from the Galil. Yeah.
Could it be possible that the rabbi was such a scholar that he understood the Greek as well as the Hebrew and could teach both? We certainly have people today that can teach any number of things because of their scholarly skills.
I think what you said is precisely correct, and think about this, okay? A modern rabbi in America, a rabbi in America, what's his first language? English. English, right? English is his first language. So a rabbi in the Galil, what's his first language? Greek, right? But he also speaks Aramaic, and he's learned Hebrew, right, from the Torah. And he has all the Torah and Tanakh scrolls, right? So, yeah, what was the exposure of Jesus? You know, maybe someday, I mean, the ArtScroll documents are kind of cool because they do give you some insight, but not all the insight we want to know. That's why some of the documents were fabricated, right, later on. I mean, there were writings fabricated about Jesus, but none of them really fabricated. You know, when they were fabricating in the Middle Ages especially, why were they fabricating documents? They wanted to fill in the holes, but what was the impression of Jesus, especially in the Franciscan era? The Benedictine era, the impression of Jesus, he was rich. In the Franciscan era, you know, St. Francis of Assisi era, Jesus was poor, right? So, you know, I would argue that Jesus is kind of middle class, you know, kind of guy-ish, right? Not so much the itinerant preacher that we like to think about, or the poor guy, you know, homeless guy wandering around Jerusalem, or whatever he's wandering around. But the church has gone through sways, you know, periods where Jesus is a rich dude, Benedictine, to Jesus is a poor dude, Franciscan, right? To today where, well, nobody even thinks about it anymore, right? In terms of a logical reason. They say, well, Jesus was obviously a homeless kid. Right?
Well, based on the text today for the sermon,
yeah,
I kind of get the idea that he was not wealthy. I mean,
were you here in the class when I taught that?
No.
Wait, I wish you were here because there is one. I don't know where the text of the pastor got, but if you look in the Greek text, there is one missing commandment out of that. You guys remember the missing commandment? The commandment that Jesus doesn't mention in Mark 10 for the rich young ruler is covetousness. The missing commandment is covetous. The rich young ruler was covetous. That was his problem. He did follow all of God's commands, but Jesus says one thing you lack. One thing is missing. One thing is missing from the list of commandments. Remember, Greek is concrete. Greek is not like our language, willy-nilly. And there's a reason why Jesus did not mention covetousness, because that's the unstated telos. The telos of that whole situation was the rich young ruler was covetous. And therefore Jesus said, sell what you have, because he knew he was covetous. And guess what? The rich young ruler knew what? He was covetous. That's why he couldn't get to heaven. And by the way, that is the beginning of the whole argument that Jesus makes about things. That if you have things, you're never going to get in the kingdom of heaven.
Because they stand in the way.
Because they stand in the way. Things, if you have things, and that's the disciples' problem. We have things. How can we get in the kingdom of heaven? We have things, right? So anyway, but it's a paradox, and we're going to have another paradox. I guess we better go because we're going to run out of paradox time. I have a paradox of paradoxes. We need more time. Look at 1235. 1235. We finished the statement, and now Jesus. And I want to mention this. You know, I told you, in the temple they don't teach, do they? The temple is all about sacrifices. Now, the word that's used is in 35. Well, Jesus was teaching. Actually, it's didasco, which is teaching, right? Or discoursing. He's making a discourse. In the temple courts is added, he asked, he legoed, he made a logical argument. Here is his logical argument. How is it that the teachers of the law say that the Christ is the son of David? Remember from the point where Jesus went into Jericho, that guy, the guy who saw the light, called Jesus what? That guy called Jesus the son of David. He said, you are the son of David. And saying you're the son of David says you are the king, right? The king. Now, you notice the logos to telos is being revisited by Jesus himself. So after he's got all these arguments or all this discussion about in the temple, right? About trying to, and they're not trying to confound Jesus. This is all logos to telos arguments to prove who Jesus is. So, who is this Jesus? While Jesus was teaching, he asked them a logical question. How is it that the teachers of the law say that the Christ is the son of David? 36. David himself, speaking by the Hagios Pneuma, the Ruach Kodesh, declared, "The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet." Now this gives a whole bunch of problems for the rabbis. This is a whole bunch of problems for the rabbis. Jesus himself said, "The Lord said to my Lord, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet." In other words, there is a Lord above David. There is a Lord above David. This is the entire question. This is, by the way, one of the reasons that the rabbis in the Talmud, when they wrote the Talmud, they said that the only part of the Bible, the only part of the Old Testament that includes any reference to the Messiah is found in the Torah. They excluded the Psalms because this comes right out of the Psalms. So let's look at it. By the way, this is the second mention of the Holy Spirit in Mark. The first is Mark 3:29, but whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will never be forgiven. And the third is Mark 13:11. Whenever you're arrested and brought to trial, do not worry beforehand about what to say, just as what is given you at the time. It's not for speaking, but by the Holy Spirit. We'll get to that eventually. But Psalm 110. "The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. The Lord will extend your mighty scepter from Zion. You will rule in the midst of your enemies. Your troops will be willing on your day of battle, arrayed in holy majesty. For the womb of the dawn you will receive the dew of your youth. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. The Lord is at your right hand. He will crush kings on the day of his wrath. He will judge the nations, heaping up the dead and crushing the rulers of the whole earth. He will drink from a brook beside the way. Therefore he will lift up his head." Boy, this is a complicated psalm. I wish we had like a whole hour to go over the Hebrew in this psalm, because it is a very complicated psalm. Look at this, though. A priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Who is it talking about? Is that talking about David? No, it's not talking about David. Look at the question that Jesus asked. Jesus said, "How is it that the teachers of the law say that the Christ is the son of David?" The question, since he came through Jericho, is, who is the son of David? The answer is in this psalm. The proof text is what we will see. Now, again, the rabbis, after this period, when they wrote the Talmud, said that there is no reference to the Messiah in the Psalms or the Proverbs. That's a declaration. The reason for that is because the Christians, and specifically Jesus' words in the New Testament, were doing what? They were using the Psalms as proof text for the Messiah. And therefore, because they could not answer the questions appropriately, they said what?
Doesn't apply.
We'll get rid of it, right? Because the conclusion can't be fit into our synopsis, our body. We're going to dump the body. That's what they did. They said, Psalms, Proverbs, nope, there's no Messiah in that. Even if those crazy Christians, which are, by the way, not Christians at the time, they are the Way, basically the fifth sect of Judaism. They're those guys. So Teen Hodos, Jesus, There is no reference because we can't answer questions. 37, David himself calls him Lord. You got God, You got the Lord over David, who is the priest in Melchizedek, right? Forever. And then you have David. David himself, 37, David himself calls him Lord. How then can he be his son? The large crowd listened to him with delight. No reason to put this into Greek because this is exactly what it says. The large crowd listened to him with delight. Why were they filled with delight?
Because somebody was putting the leaders down.
I think it's more than that. He was giving them a logos to telos, and the answer was, who is the son of David? Because that's who they're looking for. They're looking for the son of David. The minute he said this statement, this psalm, remember, it's rabbinic context. So when he says the beginning of that psalm, what is the assumption? He's talking about the whole psalm, right? And guess what they're looking for? They're looking for the high priest and king. And in every generation they got one, but he keeps dying, right? The Pharisees have one in every generation, these Asmoneans, but he's dying. They're dying. So Jesus has come and he says, well, I'm going to tell you who the king of David is, or the son of David is, right? That's what he's saying. Look what he said. 38.
But so did Jesus.
What's that?
I mean, Jesus died too.
But he rose from the dead.
I understand. But I mean, there was no resurrection of any of the others, but they all died.
Well, no, the current viewpoint, viewpoint of the rabbis from the 14th, 15th century, Mephistopheles, the rabbi, what's his name, Rambam? Rambam says now, in his writings, that there are supposed to be two. There's supposed to be a king and a high priest. And the high priest gets croaked, and he's resurrected by the king. But in the period of this period, the view was, from the apocryphal view, was that the high priest and king, the Messiah, would not die. That was their view, is the Messiah would not die. And so therefore, the disciples, seeing Jesus as the Messiah, when he kept saying that the Son of Man must die, right? That's why they were like, "Ho! No, Son of Man can't die," right? The assumption of all the guys, okay, whenever they crowned a high priest and king, the assumption was he wasn't going to die, right? This one isn't going to die this time. But then they kept dying. So when Jesus came out straight out and said that the Son of Man must die and be resurrected, number one, no one ever been resurrected in the whole world. So they're like, except for the few instances where Jesus resurrected people, right? They should have got the clue from that. But obviously they were kind of, I don't know. They're culturally biased, I guess. But they didn't get the clue. But Jesus kept saying that the Son of Man has to die and be resurrected. This was not the view. This was not the view of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the rabbis. This was not the view of the culture. This was not the view of anyone at the time. This was a new and unique idea that is not, we go back and look at the Old Testament. We go back and look at the Apocrypha. We go back and we look and we say, oh, we see evidence of that, right? They never found that evidence. We see it in retrospect. It's kind of like, we say that Jesus is 100% man and 100% God. That's because it was pointed out to us by a Christian didactician, a Christian logistician, that we look back into the New Testament and we say, oh yeah, right? I see it too. Look what Jesus does though. He gives them an obvious paradox. Gives them an obvious paradox. And what does Jesus do? Does Jesus answer them? Does he give them the telos? Why doesn't he give them the telos? What's the answer?
It's me.
It's me. I am the son of David. That's the answer, right? And in retrospect, we look back and we go, and the Greeks that are reading this, the Greeks go, Duh. Why else would he mention it, right? Why else would Jesus mention this? Especially since from the beginning of Jericho, the question has been, who is the son of David? Right? Because that guy called him the son of David. And Jesus didn't refute it. Jesus just kind of walked away from it. But guess what? After all that time, after all those logical arguments pointing to Jesus as the Messiah, right? As the Christus, now Jesus has done what? He has stated beyond a shadow of a doubt, in a Greek way, that he is what? Son of David. And so look where he goes from that. Look where he goes from that. As he didache, as he taught, Jesus lego. Watch, oh, and I want to mention this. The assumption is even the common people got this. The people thinking in Greek. You know, we think, well, first of all, the disciples seem kind of dim to us, right? And I think they are. And Jesus keeps calling them kind of stupid, right? That's what he keeps calling them. But look at the common people. The large crowd listened to him with delight. The reason they listened to it with delight, I don't think it's because the Pharisees were getting slammed. I think they listened to him with delight because they knew he was saying that he is the son of David without saying he's the son of David. If he stood up and said, I am the son of David, what would happen to him?
Kill him.
Croaked, right? It's just like all the other things that we've seen where they said, should we pay tribute to Caesar? And Jesus said no, right? But if he came out and said no flat out, they would have killed him. So in the same manner, I mean, this is why, you know, theologically speaking, this is why God wanted to use Greek, I believe, as the basis for his logic and the basis for the New Testament. Because it is so concrete. It is, to God, this is so obvious, I think. And to the common people, it's so obvious. Because they're all Greek thinkers and Greek speakers. They're used to this kind of argument. We are not. We want our Aesop's fables with the morals, right? Don't leave me hanging. Give me the conclusion because I don't want to think hard about this, right? See? What we need to do is refocus our minds in a Greek worldview and say, oh, why is this happening? Why would Jesus even mention this thing about the son of David if what? He wasn't the son of David. That's what the Greek worldview is saying. So anyway, look what it says in 38. As he did decay, Jesus logo made a logical argument. Blipo, and I don't think this is quite as negative, although there is a lot of negative in this. Blipo, look at the grammateos, the teach the law. They delight in. This is the same word that's used that the crowd was in delight. They delight in. So it's not as negative, although there's some negative stuff we're going to find out. They like to walk around in long robes, stole, long robes. And so that hemation, they have an extra robe on. And be greeted and be hugged. Aspamos, hugged in the marketplace, in the agora. Okay, this is a warning. Watch out for huggers, right? You know, I think it's really funny that, you know, it's not greeting, they're hugging. Now, why did the King James Bible not say hugging, embracing? Why did it not?
This was Victoria?
Well, it's even prior to Victoria. But that's the point. It's the culture. In the King James culture, did you walk up to somebody and go, hey, baby, how you doing? Right? No. That was, you know, a very standoffish culture. You know, remember, they barely even hugged their children in that era, right? I mean, we're talking even through the Victorian era, you know, your children were to be seen and not heard or touched, right? Didn't touch them. You didn't want to change their diapers, right? They didn't have diapers. But, you know, in that era, you didn't. And so when we wrote it, guess what we put in there? A greeting.
Well, was it the greeting like you come to somebody and you do the both sides, a little air kiss?
The Middle Eastern.
It could have been, yes.
Or was it like a arms around?
Well, see, that, in this, you know, okay, I have to say, I don't participate much in this, but in the Middle East, okay, and I have friends, we work with the Middle East, right, in our marketing. And so we have a guy who's total Francophile, who's totally engaged with the Middle East, and guess what? Every time he greets them, They greet each other with a kiss. I mean, it's total French, it's total, total Middle Eastern. That's the hug, that's the way. And remember, Paul says greet each other with the kiss of peace,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
I actually had a priest one time that would greet men with a kiss of peace on, the side of your neck, your side of your face, because he wanted to bring back that kind of greeting that was part of the early church. It's countercultural to us, though, right? So recognize why. Now, today we are more of a hugging culture, but still, it's interesting that Jesus is warning about huggers. Right? Because the point about the hugging is, do they really want, why are they greeting you that way?
We're part of the same stock.
Just recognition.
To be seen greeting you that way. So, because, okay, I'm the Pharisee. And you're, I don't know what you are, but, I'm going to give you a hug. How you doing? Right? So that makes me look what?
Important.
Gracious and important. That's what he said. They like to have flowing robes, stole, open robes, extra robes, and be hugged in the marketplace, in the agora, in the city center. Not privately hugged, but hugged in the agora, right? Specifically. And it goes on, let's see, 39. They have the most important places. And look, this comes right after the argument about my Lord told his Lord, right, about David. So the precedence here is set, right? And so now we're looking at precedence. We're looking at precedence that is being taken by the Pharisees. They have the most important seats, the procathedra. Protocathedra. Cathedra means what? Cathedra is where you sit down, by the way, a cathedral, right? Protocathedra, the important seats in the synagogues, and the places of protoclicia, the places of honor at a banquet. A cathedra you sit, in a banquet you recline to eat, right? At the diphthong. Very interesting because the word used here, remember the word Eucharistus is a prayer given before a meal. The word here used is dinner, is dipnon. It's a banquet. It's specifically a word. It's not symposia. The words we've seen before, this is a very interesting word. And this is very interesting. They katasteo, they eat down, they devour. Devour is probably a good word. They eat down widows, and literally the word chera. This word is very important. I probably should have given it to you. Maybe I'll give it to you next time if we don't get very far. But chera means a woman without protection. Chera means a woman without protection, a widow. Literally, it means a woman without protection, but it means widow. They devour, they eat down chera, women without protection, oikeo, their abodes, and for a prophius, for a pretext, not a show, for a pretext, make lengthy prayers. Literally, it's proskomai, lengthy worship. Such men will take krima, judgment, most severely. Now, you would say, well, this is really weird because Jesus is making a transition here from the son of David. But I want you to notice this is a logical argument that is part of the son of David argument. He's just talking about precedence. And he's also talking about these guys. Okay? In other words, what they're doing is culturally the exact opposite. Isn't this the exact opposite of my Lord shall put your Lord on the top, right? Right? These guys are doing the exact opposite. They are putting themselves on the top. And they're not only putting themselves on the top, they're putting themselves above widows, cherub. And what's really interesting is how this logical argument is going to unfold in the next part. It's interesting, it says they make lengthy prayers. We're not exactly sure what this means culturally, but apparently the way this is working is, okay, so you have wealthy and unwealthy widows, and you have these grammateos, these Pharisees. And obviously the Pharisees are taking advantage of the tables, the visitation of these women, right? So in the marketplace, you know, you could take this by either extension or exception. In the marketplace, they're hugging them, and the women are inviting them to eat. And so by inviting to eat, they are going to a protectionless woman. Now you can build anything you want into this, but somehow they are defrauding or taking from these women, you know, either their sustenance, their food, or whatever. Now look where it goes, though. This is where it goes, 41. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money, their chalkos, into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts. There is an enormous amount here because the word chalkos comes from the word, is related to the word cherub. The way, remember I told you that any metal in the ancient world is worth lots? A chalkos is how you made money. I take a vessel, like a copper vessel, a copper plate or a copper vessel, and I use a die to punch the coins out of the copper vessel. A chalkos is literally a piece of money made that way, and it means a void. So in other words, if I take a pot, a copper pot, or a bronze pot, and I make a chalkos out of it, I've left what in it? A hole. And that is related to the word cherub. So in other words, Jesus is not changing the logos to telos. The logos to telos is the same. It was about widows, and now he's talking about chalkos, the voids, the money created by voids. And remember, you know, this is why it's very important to note, all metal was super important in the ancient world. All metal was worth a lot. That's why they didn't use nails to crucify Christ. They used stakes made of wood because people would have stolen the metal. Even before, you know, they would have probably, you know, it's worth something, right? Because we're going to see that in a minute. In other words, okay, chalkos is a copper coin made from a vessel, and they're putting it into the temple. Let's see where we get here. In 42. Does it talk about the trumpets yet? Yeah, I'll just mention this. I'll mention this. Okay, in the temple, there are things called trumpets, and the trumpets look like this. Kind of like the vortex things that you put your money in, you know, they ring around, you know. They're made of bronze in the temple, and they go down to a strong box. Why were these put in the temple? What was the reason? Do you remember? I'll give you a hint. Jehoshaphat did it. Why did Jehoshaphat do it?
To make repairs to the temple.
But why?
Because it had been neglected.
Why?
The priests weren't doing their part.
The priests were stealing the offerings. The priests were stealing the money that was brought to the temple. And so what Jehoshaphat did is Jehoshaphat put in strong boxes with trumpets so that the priests couldn't steal the money. You couldn't put your hand down in there to get it. And they were strong boxes, and the king kept the key, right? So if you go back and look at that, I think it's in 2 Kings, you'll see that. Jehoshaphat found out the priests were stealing it. That's why the temple was in such disrepair. So he goes and he put in these strong boxes, and so they still remain. Now when you put money in, if you put gold or silver or copper or bronze, it hit and it would go ching, ching. You know, each kind would make a different sound. You know, if I had a gold coin and we had one of these, I could make the, you know, I can show you. Silver makes a different sound, bronze and copper make different sounds. And finally, the size of the money would make a difference. But in 42 it says, but a beggar, it's not poor, it's patochos, a beggar, cherub, a beggar widow, cherub. Notice we're talking about cherubs being taken advantage of by the rabbis or by the grammateus. So maybe this woman was taken advantage of by a grammateus, and so she didn't have any money. A beggar widow. came and put in, balo, threw in two very small, it says copper, but they're not copper, they're leptons. The lepton is the smallest, lepton next to the dam. Okay, remember, he said, frankly, Scarlett, I don't give a damn. That was not a curse. A dam was a small coin made in Turkey out of copper. And the dam, that's in British euphemisms, a dam is the smallest thing that there is. So if you don't give a damn, that means you don't give, anything, right? But in English, we have taken that to be a curse because there's also the other word, D-A-M, right? D-A-M-N. But a dam is spelled the same way, I think, D-A, anyway. It doesn't matter. The point is, the lepton is actually smaller than a dam. The dam is like, a percentage of a cent, but leptons were originally made of iron, and they later were made of copper. The reason we don't have many iron ones left over is why? What happens to iron?
Rusts
It rusts out, it's gone, toast. So a lepton could have been made of iron or copper. In any case, it's tiny, it's very small. So when she threw them in, the reason you can hear them is because, ding, 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 they make really tiny sound. They are smaller than a cordantes. A cordantes is a penny, is a copper penny in this culture. So anyway, calling his disciples to him in 43, Jesus said, I lego you, amen. I lego you, amen. This poor cherub, this beggar woman, has put more into the treasury than all the others. Now this is an obvious paradox. This is a paradox. Because how could she put more than everyone else, right? And what we'll do is next week, we'll discuss this, of how could she put more than anyone else into the treasury of the temple. Father God, we thank you for your word. We pray you continue to look after us this week. In your name we pray, amen.